All right, stay tuned. We'll be going back to Monday Morning Magazine in just a moment.
Good morning, Monday Morning Magazine here. Dennis Huber with Marianne Norzer, and we now have with us in the studio Janelle Eggers. Thanks for taking the time to drive down, Janelle.
Oh, it's a pleasant drive, and it's warm down here.
And today you're here to give us an update. Let's start by reminding folks that Occupy Eureka led to an urgency ordinance. I love that name, urgency ordinance. And from that arrest, and then from that, Janelle, you decided that you would file suit against the county on what grounds?
On the simple grounds that the urgency ordinance was unconstitutional.
Okay. And what's the status of the suit?
We have a brief due August 3rd, and then there's a hearing at the end of August.
And since you filed suit, the first verdict came back, right?
Yes.
There were 3 folks that were found not guilty, I guess, last week.
Yes, it was fantastic. The jury was wonderful. They were willing to deliberate for 6 days, and at the end they came out with a unanimous not guilty verdict, which is fantastic.
You know, I heard the district attorney speaking about the verdict, and I remember him saying, Paul Gallegos, that he expected that the reasons that the jury he supposed used to find a not guilty verdict wouldn't be applicable in the future if someone was to be arrested again, because there was he was framing it in terms of a constitutional question as to whether
he was saying he wasn't sure of the constitutional question that they rose, and that he framed it as, if I'm the same thing that you heard, that it was a mistake of fact.
Oh,
but
right.
In fact, that's not what the jury was asked. They were asked to decide whether it was reasonable to believe that somebody sitting on the courthouse steps felt that they had a right to be there under the Constitution.
Well, that would seem then to be a recurring possibility.
Right.
I mean, why you wouldn't give up that?
Except for that he, as I heard him saying, it was these folks now have been through the process and they understand that there's a constitutional issue, but there's still that issue of whether it is. So I'm not sure what exactly he was saying.
Maybe he's making the distinction of those 3. We'll have to get him on.
I thought that might be what he was doing, but I don't know.
The next 3 could use the same defense.
Right.
And the next 3
right,
and the next
right.
3.
And the other thing is that the constitutional, this ordinance, one of the reasons why it's unconstitutional, it is so broad. It not only the curfew, but having a table is in question.
So start again by give us a short description of the ordinance itself so that we can remind folks. When you say it's so broad, how is it?
The ordinance looks like a no camping ordinance. But within that no camping ordinance, there are restrictions on First Amendment rights. The curfew is a restriction on First Amendment rights. Having a table, an information table, is prohibited. That is a restriction on First Amendment rights. Actually being on the courthouse grounds in any way, in any manner at all, that would obstruct the flow of pedestrians is an abridgment of our rights. An assembly, can you imagine an assembly where if the crowd got large enough, they could come out and disperse the crowd because they were blocking the flow of pedestrians?
Well, in fact, there were many crowds that fit that description all those year after year after year when we tried to get the federal government to stop war on Iraq, right? In downtown Humboldt.
So that was my concern. As I looked at this ordinance, it seemed under the guise of health and safety to put broad restrictions. I mean, literally, if it could be interpreted that the only thing that you can do is stand there with a sign and hold the sign. No freestanding signs, no signs attached to the base of the flagpole. Things that have been done for years are restricted. So that's the concern, and that's the reason for the lawsuit.
Now, are you aware of other lawsuits similar lawsuits that have come about in the near past, I mean, out of the Occupy efforts across the United States, is this issue being brought forward in other communities?
Yes, it is. It is. And the camping actually isn't the concern in this lawsuit. But there have been anti-camping ordinances that have been challenged for constitutionality. And at the district level, the federal district level, there's been 4 cases, and it seems like it's 2-2.
Oh.
So this area of the law there is a constitutional question. And for me, I really didn't expect to be here at this point with an attorney filing briefs and whatnot. I actually expected that when I filed a lawsuit, this county would stop stonewalling us and would just simply get there, the county council, a couple of the board of supervisors meeting, a couple of us, and we could talk about it.
I thought there were meetings that early on along those lines. No,
they were not with the county council. The CAO was tasked to go out and talk to people.
Oh, that's right.
And what happened, I attended a couple of those meetings. He met with the Human Rights Commission. And for me, it was very uncomfortable because instead of talking about constitutional rights and that the Constitution says the government shall not abridge constitutional rights, we were talking about, well, there's a curfew here. And maybe if we have a 12 o'clock curfew, midnight curfew, instead of a 9:30 curfew, maybe that would be okay. And I'm sitting here going, wait a second, why is there a curfew? Where is the substantial governmental interest in having a curfew? That's the first question. That's the constitutional question. And then we talk about, but first we determined that we really do need a curfew.
Well, now you said that you didn't expect to be filing briefs and be with a lawyer. What did the county do in response to the lawsuit?
They hired a high-power San Francisco law firm to respond.
Really?
Yeah.
And
so
that goes without saying, an expensive decision.
Yes. They decided to spend our taxpayers' money to fight for their ordinance.
Did you attempt to have a conversation that could avoid that kind of polarizing kind of moment that's been established now?
I tried to talk to the supervisors. They didn't want to talk to me. I had some conversations. Actually, Haynes Smith was fairly, reasonable and open. I have to give him a lot of credit. Actually, I give the DA credit, and I give Haynes Smith credit because the DA was willing to stand up to the police and say taking the signs was wrong. And that, unfortunately, blew up, and things got really bad. And it was within 2 weeks of that becoming public that this ordinance came down. And that, to me, is suspect.
Oh, I see. There's a trail being blazed here.
Haynes Smith, as I said, I went to some of the meetings.
County CEO.
Mm-hmm. The county CEO. As I said, he first started talking about it in terms of how can we make this better. But as the meetings went on, he began to hear and listen to people. And his report to the board was actually very fair and very balanced. And it presented to the board the fact that people did not like this ordinance. He presented to the board the fact that the Human Rights Commission had voted unanimously asking the board to repeal the ordinance and just basically start over to look at the question of how do we deal with First Amendment rights in front of the courthouse. They had a very reasonable perspective, and he, to his credit, presented that to the board.
But it didn't go anywhere. Did it fall on deaf ears?
Well, no. Mark Lovelace did make a motion to repeal or to change the curfew, to take away the curfew. When he got resistance from a couple of the other board members, he then added to repeal the curfew but impose restrictions, nighttime restrictions on displays. So he made an effort to make it better. But again, it's the same question of, are we going to look at how close we can come to the ideal, which is no abridgment of freedom of speech, or how far down are we going to go to where things are questionable? Do you see what I'm saying? It's like there's a lot of cases dealing with this, with the issues that are here, the issues of free speech, free assembly, where it applies, when it applies, how it applies. And the courts make very fine distinctions between whether or not a law is based on what the situation is. It's not cut and dry. So do we want to be down where it's questionable, where there's a lot of lawsuits, or do we just want to come up with something that is clearly constitutional?
Well, that's been trending across the United States since 9/11, really. That our rights are questionable.
Yeah.
And we can.
But I like to think that Humboldt is unique. I really do, and I like to think that we're small enough and we could communicate and we could come up with another approach. I mean, like what Larry Goldberg was just talking about, creating our own community, our own. I like to think of it more positively. I hate to think that we're fighting this lawsuit and spending all this money. I wish there was another way.
Well, what would be that other way?
The other way would be for the Board of Supervisors to listen to the Human Rights Commission, repeal this ordinance, or at least take out all the very questionable parts, and then begin a discussion on what do we want to see in the future in front of the courthouse. Do we want to continue to have free expression in front of the courthouse, the right to assemble, the right to display a message, the right to put up displays? Do we want to continue with what we had in the past, which worked for us for a long time?
Well, but to turn it around, if you were in charge and you got to make all the decisions, then how would you frame ensuring these rights alongside the making sure that the abuse or misuse of common property, public property, if you will, would be protected as well? I mean, how do you balance that out in your mind?
I think you draw the line first at illegal activity. And so in this case, there was a lot of problems. I was there, and but at times, certain law enforcement officers chose to take protesters' signs rather than deal with disruptive behavior. At one point, the sheriff said, "We're not going to answer calls because of what the DA did. Any calls." So, I mean, literally, there were problems there. But sometimes it was hard to get the police to come. Sometimes it was that the police came and they couldn't do anything. I had a very long conversation with Pam Millsap of the EPD about their problems of dealing with the issue of homelessness and how the police are being used to simply, to deal with a problem that they're not equipped to deal with. So I think it's looking at the problem that was there, whether if it was purely illegal fighting and that type of stuff, that you deal with it with the police. If it's the homeless issue, we need to look at a solution to the homeless issue rather than just moving them along.
And taking the rights away from all of us.
Right. And in the process, take the rights away.
Is that me?
Is it me?
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I thought I
didn't.
That turned off. My apologies.
Well, the same. So instead of taking the rights, instead of taking the rights of,
because much of the behavior that was disruptive or upsetting to others, there are laws on the books that cover that.
Exactly. But in some cases, they chose actually not to. This was the most upsetting thing to me, is that at times I talked about disruptive. I actually was there at the table early one morning, and one person that was particularly disruptive was literally pounding on government property. And a police officer walked by, and I thought, great.
Maybe
perfect. And instead he looked at me and said, "Great protester you have there," and walked on by. Literally, I was floored.
Well, but it shows a lack of training.
Right, a lack
of training. It really does. I mean, that's just...
And an attitude from the top. Chief Harpham, from the beginning, lumped everybody together. Anybody there were protesters. And in fact, he implied in numerous press releases that anything bad that happened within a block radius and even down into Old Town were protesters. I mean, he would say, what appears to be protesters, did this, or what appeared to be protesters did that.
But you're pointing out that, at least locally, and I've heard this in other communities as well, that a lot of the problems came from the homeless population that was attracted to the county courthouse and perhaps, in their own way, putting a call out for attention being brought to their concerns.
That's right, and that was the hardest thing, is that there was a lot of pressure to move the homeless along, to get rid of the homeless and everything would be okay, but that's not really solving the problem, is it? And they actually do have needs, and they do have something to say, and they didn't effectively say it, I think, but it was hard just to say, move along, because we've got more important things to talk about.
Well, and there you go. I mean, now we're all the way back to the beginning of the Occupy movement.
Right.
I mean, because it does represent those that don't have a voice or the ability to influence.
Right.
When so much of our country now is in control of so few.
Yep. And that's a big problem.
So the lawsuit filed by you, you when we talked about it at first, you were doing all this work by yourself. Did I hear you say that you
are
utilizing an attorney?
Yes. When I was able to file the lawsuit, and I did the motion for a preliminary injunction, and I was able to do some other minor filings, but it just finally... It was too much, and I really couldn't face going into a hearing with three high-power attorneys and myself. It was kind of
that
silly.
Shows a lot of conviction and commitment to the principle that you're bringing forward here. And I regardless of how it turns out, I want to say that I have a lot of admiration for you being willing to stand up and get this clarified by the courts.
Well, it's important. I mean, it's a fundamental right, and somebody had to do it, and that's basically where it was.
So,
but thank you.
The wheels of justice turn slowly, if at all. Somebody said, what's the time frame for getting the lawsuit heard?
It's not until the end of August that it'll be heard on the preliminary injunction.
And where will this
That'll
take
be
place?
in the federal court, but ongoing...
The local federal?
No, in San Francisco.
Oh.
But ongoing that's the civil suit. There's also the criminal element, the criminal process, which is the 3 people were found not guilty.
Right.
That is also ongoing. Pat Kanzler, who was arrested for hanging a hand-painted American flag with the words freedom of speech written underneath it, is going to court this afternoon.
Oh.
So it continues on. And that is today at 2 p.m. in the court. She will be doing, I think it's the first hearing or something like that. But,
You know which judge is hearing that case?
It's in courtroom 5, so I don't know.
5.
It's the preliminary.
So if folks are interested in following it, they have a chance.
Yeah, today. And then again, there's putting pressure on the Board of Supervisors to listen to the Human Rights Commission and look at this. They don't, at any time they could call my attorney and say, let's talk about this. If they wanted to talk about it, I'm willing to talk about it.
Well, I want to thank you for taking time to explain again how this is all playing out on our courthouse steps, if you will. it's going to be interesting to follow it. And I agree with you that we should be the place on the planet where we settle our problems by talking to each other instead of hiring high-priced lawyers from other places to do the talking for us. I want to thank you for coming down from Fortuna.
Thank you.
And we'll keep track. And when you get something back from the courts, please get in touch, and we'll share it with listeners.
Thank you. I will.
We've been speaking with Janelle Egger, who's carrying the burden or responsibility of ensuring that our civil rights are intact here when we visit the courthouse in Eureka. And Marianne, I'm going to ask first if we managed to give away any tickets to the Planet Green conference.
We could have given away 10 pairs of tickets. We had lots of callers. Yeah, that was a very busy phone time, and I appreciate all the callers calling in and everybody listening. But yes, we did. Planet Green Conference. Anybody who tuned in late, adaptionconference.org is where you'll find more information on the Building Green Communities Conference this weekend, starting Thursday. Okay,
and I don't have anything to add to next week. I think we are going to get a full report on the Eel River Recovery Project from Pat Higgins. And there's something else I'm supposed to be able to say that is going to be a part of Monday Morning Magazine next week, but it's flew away. We'll have to wait and find out.
Oh, what tension you add to the mix.
It'll be good. It'll be good. Okay. So for now, I want to thank everyone who makes this radio station work so well, both from the folks that work here, starting with you, Marianne, and everyone else. What an asset. What a great, great resource for the whole community. So thanks to everyone who supports it, and we will see you on the radio again next week.
Support for KMUD comes from listeners like you and from Colette Fensky, Income Tax Preparation, serving Humboldt and Mendocino.
Please remember that this program is supported by the listener members of Redwood Community Radio. If you like what you hear, please consider becoming a member of KMUD or renewing if you've already joined. A regular yearly membership is $50, but we accept any amount. Help us keep free speech alive.